It was January 21st, 2026, at 2:47 a.m. when a dream so violent, so utterly consuming, drove me from my bed to this island overlooked surrounded by ocean, and there, surrounded by the rhythmic thunder of waves crashing against ancient volcanic rock 200 feet below, the salt-thick air clinging to my skin like a baptism I hadn't asked for, Jesus appeared before me with tears streaming down his face and spoke words that shattered everything I thought I understood about the coming days. Jonathan, what begins on February 3rd will separate the wheat from the chaff in ways my church is not prepared for. 5 days. 5 days that will reveal who truly knows my voice and who has been playing church. Not everyone who sees this message is meant to see it. Some will scroll past, some will ignore it. But you've been marked. You've been chosen to hear this. And what I'm about to share with you over these next few nights will either transform your faith or offend you so deeply you'll turn away. There's no middle ground anymore. Before I go any further, I need you to do something. I need you to leave your prayer requests in the comments below. Not because I'm special, I'm not. I'm just a man who plays Jesus on The Chosen, and I want to be clear about that. I'm an actor, I'm flawed, I'm broken in ways you can't imagine. But God has used that show to open doors I never expected, to create moments where the Holy Spirit moves in ways that transcend anything I could manufacture. And because of that, because of what God has done through that portrayal, people listen when I speak. So I'm asking you to leave your request below, and I will pray over every single one. I will stand in the gap for you. And if you're a true believer, if you're someone who doesn't just want comfortable Christianity, but wants the raw, unfiltered truth of what God is saying right now, in this hour, hit that subscribe button. Because what I'm going to share over the next 4 nights isn't for the casual observer. This is for the remnant. This is for those who have ears to hear. Let me take you back to that moment. The island where I was staying sits 12 miles off the coast, accessible only by boat. I'd come here seeking solitude, seeking to hear God's voice away from the noise of production schedules and social media and the constant demands of a life I never quite learned to manage. The house where I was staying perched on the eastern edge of the island, and behind it, a narrow path wound through wild grass and twisted, salt-gnarled trees to a promontory of black rock that jutted out over the Pacific like the prow of some ancient ship. I'd been having the dreams for 3 nights, each one more intense than the last, each one waking me with a sense of dread so profound I could barely breathe. In the dreams, I saw a calendar, February 3rd through February 7th, 2026, those dates circled in red, pulsing like a heartbeat, like a warning siren. And around those dates, I saw faces, thousands of them, millions of them, and they were divided. Some were radiant, glowing with a light that seemed to come from within. Others were gray, fading, their eyes empty despite their mouths forming words of worship. The third night, I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of bed at 2:30 a.m., pulled on jeans and a jacket, and walked out into the darkness. There was no moon that night. The stars were obscured by a thick marine layer that hung low over the water, creating a darkness so complete it felt like walking through velvet. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate the path, but when I reached the overlook, I turned it off. I needed to be in the dark. I needed to feel the weight of it. The temperature was 53 degrees. I remember because I'd checked before leaving the house, but the wind coming off the ocean made it feel 20 degrees colder. It cut through my jacket, through my shirt, straight to my skin. The sound was overwhelming, waves exploding against the rocks below with a force that made the ground tremble beneath my feet, the wind howling through the crevices in the volcanic stone, and beneath it all, a deeper sound, almost subsonic, like the breathing of something vast and ancient. I stood there at the edge, my toes inches from where solid ground gave way to nothing but air and a 200-foot drop to churning water and razor-sharp rocks. And I prayed, God, what are these dreams? What are you trying to tell me? I'm here. I'm listening. Please, I need to understand. The words were barely out of my mouth when the air changed. I don't know how else to describe it. The temperature didn't shift, the wind didn't stop, but something fundamental about the atmosphere altered, like reality had suddenly become thinner, more permeable. And then I smelled it, not salt and seaweed and ocean spray, but something else. Myrrh, frankincense, the scent of the ancient temple, of holy things, of the presence of God. I turned around, and he was there. Jesus stood 10 feet behind me, his form somehow both solid and radiant, more real than the rocks beneath my feet, and yet clearly not bound by the same physical laws. He was wearing simple robes that moved in the wind, actual wind, not some supernatural stillness, and his His face was wet with tears. I've portrayed Jesus for years now. I've studied his expressions, his mannerisms, the way the Gospels describe his emotions. I've wept as Jesus, I've raged as Jesus, I've laughed as Jesus, but I had never seen him like this. The grief on his face was so profound, so utterly devastating, that my knees buckled and I fell to the ground. Lord? My voice was barely a whisper, swallowed by the wind. He moved closer, and when he spoke, his voice somehow cut through the roar of wind and waves as clearly as if we were in a silent room. Jonathan, do you know what breaks my heart more than anything else in this hour? I shook my head, unable to speak. It's not the darkness of the world. It's not the evil that parades itself openly in the streets. It's not even the persecution that's coming. He paused, and a fresh stream of tears ran down his cheeks. It's that my church, my bride, has become so comfortable with comfort that they can no longer hear my voice when it calls them to something hard. He gestured toward the ocean, toward the vast darkness that stretched to the horizon. Look at the water, Jonathan. What do you see? I looked. In the darkness, I could see almost nothing, just the white foam of breaking waves, the occasional glint of starlight breaking through the clouds and reflecting off the surface. I see darkness, Lord. I see waves. Look deeper. And suddenly my vision changed. I don't know if he opened my eyes or if he changed what was there, but the ocean before me transformed. The water became transparent, and I could see down into the depths. And there, in the deep places, I saw people, thousands of them, millions of them. They were swimming, treading water, some floating peacefully, others struggling against currents I couldn't see. These are my people, Jesus said. These are those who call themselves by my name. As I watched, the water began to change. Starting from the horizon and moving toward the shore, a line appeared, a demarcation between two different types of water. On one side, the water remained clear, calm, navigable. On the other side, it darkened, churned, became violent and treacherous. February 3rd through February 7th, Jesus said, and his voice carried a weight that made my chest tighten. 5 days when the waters will divide. 5 days when what has been hidden will be revealed. 5 days when every believer will have to choose which side of the line they're on. What happens on those days? I asked, my voice shaking. He turned to look at me fully, and the intensity of his gaze nearly undid me. A test. Not from me. I don't test my children with tricks and traps, but a revealing. Events will unfold in the world, in the church, in the spiritual realm, that will require my people to respond, and their response will show what they've really been building their faith upon. He knelt down beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him despite the cold wind. Jonathan, I need you to understand something. The church in America, in the West, has been lulled to sleep by prosperity and comfort. They've been taught a gospel that promises them ease, that tells them faith is about feeling good and being blessed and having their best life now. And because of that, when I call them to something that costs them, when I ask them to take a stand that might cost them their reputation, their comfort, their safety, they don't recognize my voice anymore. The wind picked up, and spray from the waves below began to mist over us. I could taste salt on my lips. What will the test be? I asked. Jesus stood and walked to the very edge of the overlook. For a moment I thought he might step off into the air, might walk out over the water like he did on Galilee, but he just stood there looking out into the darkness. I'm going to ask my church to do something that will seem foolish to the world. I'm going to ask them to stand for truth when standing will cost them. I'm going to ask them to speak when speaking will make them targets. I'm going to ask them to trust me when every logical voice tells them to compromise. He turned back to me, and most of them will fail. The words hit me like a physical blow. Most of them? Most of them, he repeated, and the sorrow in his voice was unbearable. Because they've been trained to seek comfort, not crucifixion. They've been taught to pursue blessing, not persecution. They've been told that faith is about what I can do for them, not about what they're willing to suffer for me. I thought about the churches I'd visited, the conferences I'd spoken at, the thousands of believers I'd met through the chosen. Good people, sincere people, people who loved God and wanted to serve him. But Lord, they're trying. They're doing their best. Are they? His voice wasn't harsh, but it was firm. Or have they created a version of Christianity that fits comfortably within the boundaries of their culture? A faith that never requires them to be truly different, truly set apart, truly willing to lose everything for my sake? He walked back to me and placed his hand on my shoulder. The touch was warm, solid, real. Jonathan, I'm not condemning them. I'm warning them. I'm giving them time to prepare. That's why I'm speaking to you tonight. That's why I'm going to show you what's coming. Because February 3rd through 7th is not the end. It's the beginning. It's the first wave. And if my people aren't ready, if they haven't learned to hear my voice above the noise of their comfort and their fear, they're going to be swept away when the real storm comes. I looked back at the vision of the ocean, at the line dividing the waters. As I watched, the line moved closer to shore, and the people in the water began to react. Some swam toward the calm water with desperate strokes. Others seemed paralyzed, unable to move. Still others actually swam toward the dark water, as if drawn by something I couldn't see. Why would they swim toward the darkness? I asked. Jesus' expression grew even more grave. Because the darkness will disguise itself as light. Because false prophets will arise, are already arising, who will tell my people that the easy path is the righteous path, that compromise is wisdom, that silence is prudence, that protecting yourself is just being responsible. He squeezed my shoulder, and many will believe them. Many will choose the path that looks safe, that feels comfortable, that doesn't require them to sacrifice anything, and they will think they're being faithful. They will quote scripture, they will pray prayers, they will attend services, but they will have chosen comfort over obedience, and that choice will cost them everything. The vision faded, and I was back on the overlook, just me and Jesus and the roaring ocean and the cold wind. My whole body was shaking, from cold, from fear, from the weight of what I'd just seen and heard. What do? I asked. How do I prepare? How do I help others prepare? Jesus smiled then, and despite everything, despite the tears still on his face and the gravity of his words, that smile carried hope. You start by understanding that this isn't about fear, this is about awakening. This is about my people remembering who they are and whose they are. This is about the church becoming the church again, not a social club, not a self-help seminar, not a political movement, but my body, my bride, my called out ones who are willing to be different, to be strange, to be fools for my sake. He began to fade, the light that emanated from him growing dimmer. Tomorrow night, he said, his voice becoming distant, meet me here again. There's more you need to see, more you need to understand. The warning is just the beginning, Jonathan. The question is whether my people will have ears to hear it. And then he was gone. I was alone on the overlook, the wind still howling, the waves still crashing, the darkness still complete. But something had changed in me. Something had awakened. I looked at my phone, 4:23 a.m. I'd been on that overlook for nearly 2 hours, though it had felt like minutes. I made my way back to the house in the pre-dawn darkness, my mind reeling, my heart pounding. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat at the window and watched the sun rise over the ocean, watched the light gradually reveal what the darkness had hidden, the vast expanse of water, the jagged rocks below, the beauty and terror of creation. And I thought about February 3rd through 7th, 2026. I thought about the test that was coming. I thought about the church, about you, and whether we're ready for what God is about to do. Listen to me. If you're watching this, if you've made it this far, you need to understand something. This isn't a game. This isn't entertainment. This isn't just another YouTube video to consume and forget. Something is coming. Jesus himself told me, he showed me, and he's giving us time to prepare, but that time is short. February 3rd is less than 2 weeks away. 2 weeks to get your heart right. 2 weeks to learn to hear his voice above the noise. 2 weeks to decide whether you're going to be part of the remnant that stands or part of the crowd that compromises. Tomorrow night, I'm going to share what Jesus showed me in our second encounter. It's harder than what I've told you tonight. It's more specific. It's more challenging. But you need to hear it. Leave your prayer requests below. Subscribe if you're serious about this journey. And most importantly, start preparing your heart now. Because the test is coming and most of the church has no idea. I didn't leave the island. I couldn't. After that first encounter, I spent January 22nd in a state I can only describe as holy restlessness. I tried to eat, couldn't. Tried to read, couldn't focus. Tried to pray, and found myself simply sitting in silence, waiting, knowing that sunset would bring another encounter, another revelation, another piece of the puzzle that Jesus was laying before me. The day was gray, overcast, The kind of weather where the ocean and sky blend into a single sheet of pewter, where distance becomes impossible to judge and the world feels compressed, intimate, claustrophobic, despite the vast expanse of water surrounding the island. The temperature had dropped overnight, now hovering around 47 degrees, and a steady wind from the northwest brought with it the smell of rain, though none had fallen yet. I spent hours walking the perimeter of the island, praying, wrestling with what I'd seen and heard. Part of me wanted to dismiss it. Part of me wanted to believe it was just my imagination, just the product of stress and too many late nights and the weight of portraying Jesus for so many years finally getting to me. But I couldn't. The encounter had been too real, too vivid, too utterly beyond anything I could have manufactured. And so I waited. At 6:47 p.m., as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, invisible behind the thick cloud cover but marked by a gradual dimming of the already muted light, I made my way back to the overlook. The path was muddy from condensation, the wild grass wet and clinging to my jeans. The twisted trees seemed to lean in closer than they had the night before, their branches reaching toward me like gnarled fingers. When I reached the promontory, I stopped. He was already there. Jesus stood at the very edge of the overlook, his back to me, his robes whipping in the wind. The clouds above had begun to break apart, creating shafts of dying sunlight that pierced through to illuminate patches of ocean in brilliant gold against the darker water. It was breathtaking and terrible all at once. "You came," he said without turning around. "Of course I came, Lord." My voice was hoarse from a day of little speaking and much internal turmoil. Not everyone would have. He turned to face me, and I saw that his eyes were red, as if he'd been weeping all day. Not everyone does. I call, and they make excuses. They have work. They have obligations. They have comfort to maintain. They'll seek me when it's convenient, but when I ask them to meet me in the uncomfortable places, in the hard places, in the places that require sacrifice, they find reasons to stay away. He gestured for me to come closer, to stand beside him at the edge. I did, my heart pounding, acutely aware of the drop below, the rocks, the churning water. "Look down," he said. I looked. The waves crashed against the volcanic rock with tremendous force, sending spray 50 feet into the air. The water was dark, almost black in the fading light, and the foam was tinged with the gold of sunset. "What do you see?" "I see power, Lord. I see beauty. I see danger." "Look deeper." And again my vision changed. The water became transparent and I could see down into the depths. But this time, instead of seeing people swimming, I saw something else. I saw churches, thousands of them, tens of thousands. They sat on the ocean floor like sunken ships, their steeples pointing upward toward the surface, their walls intact, but their interiors dark and empty. "What happened to them?" I whispered. "They sank," Jesus said simply. "Not because I abandoned them, not because the enemy destroyed them. They sank because they were built on sand, and when the storms came, they had no foundation to hold them." He knelt down at the edge of the overlook, and I knelt beside him. The wind was stronger now, colder, and I could feel the spray from the waves below misting over us. "Jonathan, I need you to understand what's happening in my church. I need you to see what I see. Can you handle that?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I could. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the air in front of us, and suddenly we weren't just looking down at the ocean. We were in it, not physically, but in vision, in spirit. We descended through the water, down past the surface, down into the depths where the sunken churches sat. We entered one of them. It was a large building, modern, with stadium seating and professional lighting and massive screens. But it was underwater, and everything was covered in a thick layer of sediment. Jesus walked down the center aisle, and I followed. Our movement didn't disturb the water. We moved through it as if it wasn't there. "This church had 5,000 members," Jesus said, his voice echoing in the submerged sanctuary. 5,000 people who came every Sunday, who sang the songs, who raised their hands, who posted about their faith on social media. The pastor was charismatic, gifted, a powerful speaker. They had programs for every demographic, ministries for every need, a budget in the millions. He stopped at the front, where a massive stage sat empty and dark. And when February 3rd comes, when the test begins, 90% of them will fail. The number hit me like a punch to the gut. 90%? Lord, that can't be. At 90%, he repeated, and his voice was firm. Because they were never taught to count the cost. They were taught that following me means being blessed, being prosperous, being comfortable. They were taught that faith is about what I can do for them, not about what they're willing to lose for me. He turned to face me fully. Jonathan, do you know what the test will be? Do you want to know specifically what's going to happen on those 5 days? I wasn't sure I did, but I nodded anyway. Jesus waved his hand, and the sunken church disappeared. We were back on the overlook, but now it was fully dark. The clouds had cleared, and above us, the stars blazed with an intensity I'd never seen before. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light, and I could see planets, constellations, the vast machinery of the cosmos turning in its eternal dance. On February 3rd, Jesus began, his voice taking on a prophetic quality that made the hair on my arm stand up. A situation will arise in this nation that will require my people to choose. It will start small, a news story, an incident, something that most people will scroll past without much thought. But by February 4th, it will have grown. It will have become a controversy, and the world will demand that my church take a position. He pointed to the stars above us. Do you see those stars, Jonathan? Each one is a sun, many with their own planets, their own systems. The universe is vast beyond human comprehension. And yet I know each star by name. I set each one in its place. I maintain the laws that govern their movement. Nothing in all of creation is beyond my knowledge or my care. He lowered his hand and looked at me. And yet my church will be asked to deny me. Not with those words, of course. They'll be asked to be reasonable, to be compassionate, to be loving in a way that the world defines love. They'll be told that standing for truth is hateful, that maintaining biblical standards is bigoted, that refusing to compromise is dangerous. The wind picked up, and I heard thunder in the distance. A storm was coming. And most of them will cave, Jesus continued. Most of them will issue statements and apologies and clarifications. Most of them will say, we didn't mean it that way, and we're not like those other Christians, and we just want everyone to feel welcome. And in doing so, they will deny me. Not with their words. They'll still use my name, still claim to follow me, but with their actions, with their compromise, with their desperate need to be accepted by a world that hates me. I felt tears streaming down my face. But Lord, they're just trying to show love. They're trying to reach people. They don't want to push people away from you. Jesus' expression was both tender and fierce. Jonathan, do you remember what I said in the Gospels? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels. Do you remember that? I nodded. I didn't say that to be cruel. I said it because there's a difference between loving people and compromising truth. There's a difference between showing compassion and denying reality. There's a difference between meeting people where they are and staying there with them, never calling them higher, never challenging them to be transformed. He began to pace along the edge of the overlook, and I watched him, this Jesus I thought I knew, this Jesus I'd portrayed for years, revealing depths I'd never fully grasped. The church has been seduced by the spirit of the age, he said. They've been told that the greatest virtue is tolerance, that the highest good is making everyone feel affirmed, that the ultimate goal is unity at any cost. And so they've watered down my words, softened my commands, reinterpreted my teachings to fit within the boundaries of what their culture finds acceptable. Lightning flashed on the horizon, illuminating the ocean in stark white light for a brief moment. The thunder that followed was closer now, but I didn't call my church to be acceptable. I called them to be holy. I called them to be set apart. I called them to be a city on a hill, a light in the darkness, salt that actually has flavor and preserves and stings when it touches wounds. And salt that loses its saltiness is good for nothing except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. He stopped pacing and stood directly in front of me. February 3rd through 7th will reveal who has maintained their saltiness and who has become bland, useless, indistinguishable from the world around them. And Jonathan, the results are going to shock everyone. Churches that everyone thinks are strong will crumble. Leaders that everyone thinks are faithful will compromise. Ministries that everyone thinks are anointed will be revealed as hollow. And what about the ones who stand? I asked. What about the ones who refuse to compromise? For the first time that night, Jesus smiled. Ah, now you're asking the right question. He turned back toward the ocean, and suddenly the vision returned. I could see down into the water again, see the sunken churches, but now I also saw something else. Scattered among the ruins, I saw lights. small at first, like candles in the darkness. But as I watched, they grew brighter, stronger, until they were like beacons, like lighthouses, like stars that had fallen into the ocean and refused to be extinguished. "These are my remnant," Jesus said, and his voice was filled with pride and love. "These are the ones who will stand when standing costs them everything. These are the ones who will speak truth when speaking makes them targets. These are the ones who will choose me over comfort, obedience over acceptance, holiness over popularity." The lights began to rise through the water, ascending toward the surface. And when they stand, when they refuse to compromise, something will happen that the enemy doesn't expect. Others will see their courage and find their own. Others will hear their voices and remember mine. Others will watch them pay the price and decide that I'm worth it. The lights broke through the surface of the water, and suddenly they weren't lights anymore. They were people. Thousands of them, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. They stood on the water, impossible and glorious, and their faces were radiant with a joy that transcended circumstances. "This is what February 3rd through 7th is really about," Jesus said. "Not judgment, though there will be judgment. Not destruction, though some things need to be destroyed. It's about separation. It's about revealing who's really mine and who's just been playing church. It's about purifying my bride, burning away the dross, refining the gold." The vision faded, and we were back on the overlook. The storm was nearly upon us now. The wind had become fierce, and the first drops of rain were beginning to fall, cold and hard against my skin. "Lord, I'm scared," I admitted. "I'm scared that I'll fail the test. I'm scared that when the moment comes, I'll choose comfort over you." Jesus placed both hands on my shoulders and looked directly into my eyes. "Jonathan, do you know why I chose to speak to you, why I'm showing you these things?" I shook my head. "Because you've already failed me before. You've already chosen comfort over obedience. You've already compromised when you should have stood firm. You're not perfect. You're not some spiritual giant. You're broken and flawed, and you struggle with the same things everyone else struggles with." His words should have crushed me, but somehow they didn't. "And that's exactly why you're the right person to carry this message, because when you tell people what's coming, they won't be able to dismiss you as someone who doesn't understand their struggles. They won't be able to say, 'Easy for him to say,' because you know how hard it is. You know what it costs, and you know that the only way to stand is not through your own strength, but through mine." The rain was falling harder now, soaking through my jacket, plastering my hair to my head. Jesus seemed unaffected by it, though I could see the drops falling around him. "Tomorrow night," he said, "I'm going to show you what happens to those who fail the test. I'm going to show you the consequences of compromise. It won't be easy to see, it won't be comfortable to hear, but you need to know, because the church needs to know, because the time for comfortable Christianity is over." He began to fade, but his voice remained strong. "The storm is here, Jonathan, not just this storm." He gestured to the rain and wind and lightning. "But the storm, the one I warned about in my parables, the one that tests every foundation, that reveals what's really underneath all the religious activity and spiritual language. And when it's over, only what's built on me will remain standing." And then he was gone, and I was alone in the storm. I stood there for a long time, letting the rain soak me, letting the wind buffet me, letting the cold seep into my bones. I needed to feel it. I needed to experience the discomfort, the harshness, the reality of being exposed to the elements without shelter. Because that's what's coming for the church. That's what February 3rd through 7th represents. The removal of shelter, the exposure of foundations, the testing of what we've really built our lives upon. I finally made my way back to the house around 9:30 p.m., shivering and exhausted. I changed into dry clothes, made tea that I barely drank, and sat by the window watching the storm rage over the ocean. Lightning illuminated the waves in brief, stark flashes. Thunder shook the windows. The wind howled like something alive and angry. And I thought about the 90%. 90% of that church Jesus showed me would fail the test. If that ratio held across the broader church, and Jesus had implied it would, then we were looking at a catastrophic failure of faith. Millions of people who thought they were following Jesus, who believed they were saved, who attended services and read their Bibles and prayed prayers, would choose comfort over Christ when the moment of testing came. The thought was almost unbearable, but then I thought about the remnant, the lights in the darkness, the ones who would stand, and I felt something shift in my chest, not quite hope, not quite courage, but something like determination. a resolve that whatever the cost, whatever the test, I wanted to be among those who stood. I want you to understand something. If you're still watching, if you've made it this far, you need to ask yourself a hard question. Which group are you in? Are you part of the 90% who will compromise when compromise seems reasonable? Or are you part of the remnant who will stand when standing costs you everything? You might think you know the answer. You might be confident in your faith, certain of your commitment. But Jesus showed me something tonight that shook me to my core. Most of the people who will fail the test think they're going to pass it. Most of the churches that will compromise think they're standing firm. Most of the leaders who will cave think they're being wise. The deception is that deep. The blindness is that complete. And that's why these warnings matter. That's why Jesus is speaking now, before February 3rd, giving us time to examine our foundations, to test what we've built our faith upon, to prepare for what's coming. Tomorrow night I'll share the third encounter. Jesus promised to show me the consequences of failure, and I'm not going to lie to you. I'm dreading it, but I'll be there. I'll meet him on that overlook again. I'll receive whatever he wants to show me. The question is, will you be ready to hear it? Leave your prayer requests below. Tell me honestly where you are in your faith journey. Are you confident you'll stand, or are you afraid you'll fall? There's no judgment here, only truth. Only the desperate need for all of us to get real about where we are and what's coming. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this with everyone you know who claims to follow Jesus. Because the test is coming in less than 2 weeks and most of the church has no idea the storm is here, and it's only going to get worse before it gets better. January 23rd, 2026. The storm had passed during the night, leaving the island washed clean and strangely silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, expectant, like the world is holding its breath. I woke at dawn, not because I'd slept well, but because I'd barely slept at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those sunken churches, those lights rising through the water, that number echoing in my mind, 90%. 90% will fail. I spent the day in prayer and fasting, not because I'm some super spiritual person, I'm not, but because I knew what was coming that night would require every ounce of spiritual strength I could muster. Jesus had said he would show me the consequences of compromise, and something in his tone, something in the sorrow that never left his eyes told me it would be worse than anything I'd seen so far. The day was crystalline, almost painfully bright. The storm had scrubbed the sky clean, and the sun reflected off the ocean in a blinding sheet of silver. The temperature had risen to 58 degrees, but the wind remained strong, steady from the west, carrying the scent of salt and seaweed and something else, something like electricity, like the air before another storm, though the sky showed no signs of clouds. I walked the island's perimeter 3 times that day, praying, wrestling, preparing. Each time I passed the path to the overlook, I felt a pull, a magnetic draw toward that place where heaven and earth seemed to meet. But I waited. I knew the encounter would come at the appointed time, and I needed to be ready. At 7:15 p.m., as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, visible tonight, a massive orange sphere that seemed to set the ocean on fire, I made my way to the overlook for the 3rd time. My legs felt heavy, as if I were walking through water. My heart pounded in my chest with a rhythm that felt too fast, too irregular. I was afraid. I'm not ashamed to admit that. I was terrified of what Jesus was about to show me. When I reached the promontory, the sight that greeted me stopped me in my tracks. Jesus was there, but he wasn't alone. The overlook was filled with figures, translucent, ghostly, but somehow more real than the rocks beneath my feet. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands, and they were all facing away from me, looking out over the ocean toward the setting sun. Jesus stood at the front of the crowd at the very edge of the overlook, and when he turned to look at me, I saw that his face was set like flint. The sorrow was still there, but now it was mixed with something else, a holy anger, a righteous fury that made me want to fall to my knees. "Come," he said, his voice cutting through the sound of wind and waves. "Stand with me. Watch what I'm about to show you." I moved through the crowd of figures. They parted for me like smoke, and took my place beside Jesus at the edge. The drop below seemed even more precipitous tonight, the rocks sharper, the water more violent despite the calm weather. "Who are they?" I asked, gesturing to the figures behind us. "Witnesses," Jesus said, "the great cloud of witnesses, those who stood firm in their generations, who paid the price, who refused to compromise even when compromise would have saved their lives. They're here because what I'm about to show you matters to them, because the faith they died for is being sold for comfort by those who claim to follow me." He turned back toward the ocean, and the sun seemed to pause in its descent, hanging just above the horizon, bathing everything in blood-red light. "Jonathan, you asked me yesterday what happens to those who fail the test. You asked about the consequences of compromise. Are you sure you want to see?" Every fiber of my being wanted to say no, wanted to turn around, walk back to the house, get on the boat tomorrow morning and return to the mainland and forget any of this ever happened. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. "Yes, Lord, show me." Jesus raised his hand and the ocean before us transformed. The water became like glass, perfectly smooth, perfectly reflective. And in that reflection I saw not the sky above, but something else. A vision, a revelation, a glimpse into a reality that made my stomach turn. I saw a church. Not one of the sunken ones from the previous night, but a living, active church. It was Sunday morning, and the sanctuary was packed. The worship band was playing. The lights were professional and perfectly timed. The congregation was singing with raised hands and closed eyes. Everything looked normal. Everything looked blessed. But Jesus spoke, and his words revealed the truth beneath the appearance. "This is one of the churches that will fail the test," he said. "Watch what happens." The scene shifted. It was now February 4th, 2026. I knew this somehow, knew it with the certainty that comes in visions. The pastor stood at the pulpit, and his face was troubled. He held a piece of paper, a statement, I realized, and he was reading it to the congregation. I couldn't hear the exact words, but I could feel their substance. He was apologizing, clarifying, explaining that the church's previous stance on a particular issue had been misunderstood and that they wanted to make clear they were a place of love and acceptance for all people, and that they didn't judge anyone, and that they believed in meeting people where they are. The congregation applauded. They actually applauded. And as they did, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A darkness began to seep into the sanctuary like smoke, like oil, like something alive and malevolent. It entered through the doors, through the windows, through the very walls. And as it touched people, they changed. Not physically. They still looked the same, still smiled the same, still raised their hands in worship. But something in their eyes died. Some light that had been there was extinguished. "What is that?" I whispered. "The spirit of the age," Jesus said, his voice hard. "The spirit of compromise. The spirit that says truth is negotiable, that holiness is optional, that standing firm is unloving. Once it's invited in, once the door is opened through compromise, it doesn't leave. It spreads, it infects, it kills." The scene shifted again. Now it was weeks later, months later, the same church, but different. The worship was still loud, still professional, but it was empty, like a beautiful shell with nothing living inside it. The preaching was still polished, still well delivered, but it had no power, no anointing, no ability to transform. People still came, still filled the seats, still went through the motions, but the presence of God was gone. "They don't even notice," Jesus said, and his voice broke. "That's the worst part. They don't even notice that I've left. They're so busy maintaining the appearance of spirituality that they don't realize the substance is gone. They're like the church in Laodicea, lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, and I'm about to spit them out of my mouth." The vision in the water shifted to show another church, and another, and another, each one with the same pattern. The test comes, the compromise is made, the darkness enters, the presence leaves. Some of the compromises were blatant, outright denials of biblical truth, complete capitulation to cultural pressure. Others were subtle, small adjustments in language, minor shifts in emphasis, gentle reframings that seemed reasonable, but ultimately betrayed the foundation. But the result was always the same: death, spiritual death that looked like life, that maintained all the external forms while the internal reality rotted away. "Lord, this is unbearable," I said, tears streaming down my face. "How can they not see? How can they not understand what they're doing?" Jesus turned to me, and the anguish on his face was so profound I had to look away. Because they've been taught that the greatest sin is making people uncomfortable. They've been taught that love means never challenging anyone, never calling sin what it is, never demanding holiness. They've been taught that being relevant is more important than being righteous, that being accessible is more important than being set apart. He gestured to the vision in the water, where now I could see not just churches, but individual believers, families, leaders, all making the same choice, all compromising in ways large and small, all watching the light die in their eyes without even realizing it was happening. And the tragedy, the absolute tragedy, is that they think they're doing the right thing. They think they're showing love. They think they're being wise. They think they're protecting their witness, their influence, their ability to reach people. But what they don't understand is that a church without truth has nothing to offer. A gospel without holiness is no gospel at all. A Jesus who never challenges, never confronts, never demands anything is not me. It's an idol they've created in their own image. The sun finally began to move again, sinking lower toward the horizon, and the blood-red light deepened to crimson, to burgundy, to a color that looked like darkness itself. "Show me the rest," I said, though I didn't want to see it. "Show me what happens to them." Jesus' expression became even graver. "Are you certain?" "I have to know. People have to know. We can't warn them if we don't understand what they're being warned about." He nodded slowly, then raised his hand again. The vision in the water shifted one final time, and now I saw the future, not the immediate future of February, but months and years beyond. I saw the churches that had compromised continuing to decline, slowly at first, then more rapidly. Attendance dropped, giving decreased. The younger generation left in droves, seeing through the hollow spirituality, hungry for something real, but finding only empty performance. I saw pastors who had made the compromise burning out, falling into depression, some into addiction, some into affairs. Because when you disconnect from the source of true power, you start seeking power in other places, darker places. I saw families that had been part of these churches for generations walking away, not from Jesus, not yet, but from organized religion, from the church, from community, becoming isolated, vulnerable, easy prey for deception. I saw the darkness that had entered through compromise spreading beyond the church walls, affecting communities, cities, regions. Because the church is supposed to be salt and light, and when it loses its saltiness, when it hides its light, the decay spreads unchecked. But worst of all, I saw the children. I saw the next generation growing up in these compromised churches, being taught a version of Christianity that had no power, no truth, no ability to transform. And I saw them reaching adulthood and walking away entirely, not because they rejected Jesus, they never really knew him, but because they rejected the weak, ineffective, culturally captive religion they'd been shown and told was Christianity. An entire generation, Jesus said, his voice barely above a whisper. An entire generation lost because their parents and grandparents chose comfort over truth. Because the leaders who were supposed to shepherd them chose popularity over holiness. Because the church that was supposed to be my body chose to amputate the parts that the world found offensive. The vision faded, and we were back on the overlook, the sun now touching the horizon, the sky ablaze with colors that were beautiful and terrible all at once. The figures behind us, the cloud of witnesses, were weeping. I could hear their sobs, feel their grief, sense their righteous anger at what was being done to the faith they had died to preserve. I fell to my knees, overcome by the weight of what I'd seen. "What can we do?" I asked. "How do we stop this? How do we wake people up before it's too late?" Jesus knelt beside me, and his hand on my shoulder was the only thing keeping me from complete despair. "You tell them the truth," he said. "You show them what I've shown you. You warn them that the test is coming and that most will fail unless they prepare now. You call them back to the ancient paths, to the narrow way, to the faith that costs everything and gives everything." "But will they listen?" I asked. "Will they hear?" "Some will," Jesus said. "Not most, not even many, but some. And those who do, those who choose to stand firm, those who refuse to compromise no matter the cost, they will be the foundation of what I'm building next. They will be the remnant that carries true faith into the next season. They will be the ones through whom I move in power." He helped me to my feet, and we stood together at the edge of the overlook, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The moment it disappeared, the temperature dropped dramatically. I could feel it, a sudden chill that went bone deep. "Tomorrow night," Jesus said, "I'll show you the hope. I'll show you what happens to those who stand firm, who refuse to compromise, who choose me over comfort. I'll show you the glory that awaits the faithful remnant." Because this isn't just a message of warning, Jonathan. It's also a message of promise for those who have ears to hear. He turned to face me fully, and in the dying light, his face seemed to glow with an inner radiance. "But tonight, I need you to sit with what you've seen. I need you to let it break your heart the way it breaks mine. I need you to feel the weight of what's at stake, because if you don't feel it, if you don't carry the burden of it, you won't be able to communicate the urgency to others. The cloud of witnesses began to fade, their forms becoming more translucent, more ethereal, until they were gone entirely. Jesus began to fade as well, but his voice remained strong. The test is coming in 11 days, 11 days for my church to wake up, to examine their foundations, to decide whether they're going to stand or fall. 11 days to choose between comfort and crucifixion, between acceptance and holiness, between the approval of man and the approval of God. His form was almost completely transparent now, barely visible against the darkening sky. Tell them, Jonathan, tell them what you've seen. Tell them what's coming. Tell them that I love them too much to let them continue in deception. Tell them that the time for playing church is over. Tell them that I'm calling my bride to be beautiful again, to be holy again, to be mine again, truly mine, not just in name, but in reality. And then he was gone. I stood alone on the overlook as full darkness fell. The stars began to appear, one by one, then in clusters, then in vast sweeping rivers of light. The temperature continued to drop. It was probably in the low 40s now, and I was shivering, but I couldn't make myself leave. Not yet. I thought about everything I'd seen over these 3 nights. The sunken churches, the 90% who would fail, the darkness entering through compromise, the generations lost, the slow death of spirituality that maintained all the external forms while the internal reality died, and I wept. I wept for the church. I wept for the pastors who would compromise thinking they were being wise. I wept for the families who would be led astray. I wept for the children who would grow up never knowing the real Jesus because they'd only been shown a sanitized, culturally acceptable version that had no power to save. But even as I wept, something else was growing in my chest. Not quite hope, not yet, but something like defiance. A holy stubbornness, a determination that whatever the cost, whatever the test, whatever the price, I would not be part of the 90%. I would stand, I would speak truth, I would refuse to compromise even if it cost me everything, because I'd seen what compromise costs, and it's far more expensive than faithfulness could ever be. I finally made my way back to the house around 10:30 p.m., exhausted in body and soul. I didn't eat, I barely drank water. I just sat in the darkness, replaying the visions, feeling the weight of them, letting them reshape something fundamental in my understanding of what it means to follow Jesus. Listen to me. If you're still watching, if you've made it this far through these 3 nights of revelation, you need to understand something crucial. What I've shown you isn't meant to discourage you. It's meant to wake you up. It's meant to shock you out of comfortable Christianity and into the reality of what's at stake. February 3rd through 7th is coming. The test is coming. And based on what Jesus showed me, most of the church is going to fail. Not because they're bad people, not because they don't love God, but because they've been trained to value comfort over truth, acceptance over holiness, relevance over righteousness. But it doesn't have to be you. You can be part of the remnant. You can be one of the lights that rises through the darkness. You can be someone who stands firm when everyone around you is compromising, but only if you prepare now. Only if you examine your foundation now. Only if you decide now, before the test comes, that you're going to choose Jesus over everything else, no matter what it costs. Tomorrow night, I'll share the final encounter. Jesus promised to show me the hope, the glory, the promise for those who stand firm. And I need that. After 3 nights of seeing the darkness, the compromise, the consequences, I desperately need to see the light. But tonight, I need you to sit with what I've shared. I need you to ask yourself hard questions. What would I compromise to keep my job? What would I deny to maintain my relationships? What would I stay silent about to avoid being labeled, attacked, canceled? What does my faith actually cost me right now? And if it costs me nothing, is it really faith at all? Leave your honest answers in the comments. Tell me where you're struggling. Tell me what you're afraid of. Tell me what compromises you've already made that you need to repent of. Because we have 11 days. 11 days to get our hearts right. 11 days to build on the rock instead of the sand. 11 days before the storm hits and reveals what we've really been building on. The test is coming, and most of the church has no idea, but you do. Now the question is, what are you going to do about it? January 24th, 2026. I woke before dawn, though I'm not sure I ever truly slept. My mind had been churning all night with images from the previous 3 encounters. The sunken churches, the encroaching darkness, the light dying in people's eyes as they made the choice to compromise. But underneath the heaviness, underneath the grief and the fear, something else had been growing, something I couldn't quite name yet. Hope, maybe, or perhaps defiance, or maybe just the stubborn determination that comes when you've seen the worst and decided you're going to fight for the best anyway. The sky was just beginning to lighten when I made my way to the overlook for what I knew would be the final time. The air was crisp, 43 degrees according to my phone, and perfectly still. No wind, no sound except the distant rhythm of waves against rock. The ocean stretched before me like hammered steel in the pre-dawn light, and above, the last stars were fading as the sky shifted from black to deep blue to violet. I didn't know what time Jesus would appear. The previous 3 nights had been different, late evening, sunset, dusk, but somehow I knew I needed to be there for the sunrise, that whatever he was going to show me about hope, about the remnant, about the glory awaiting those who stand firm, it needed to be revealed in the light of a new day. I sat on the rocks near the edge of the overlook and waited. And as I waited, I prayed. Not eloquent prayers. Not the kind of prayers that sound good when spoken aloud. Just raw, honest conversation with God. Father, I don't know if I'm strong enough for what's coming. I don't know if I can stand when standing costs me everything. I've failed you before. I've compromised before. I've chosen comfort over obedience more times than I can count. But I want to be different. I want to be part of the remnant. I want to be someone who stands firm. So whatever you need to do in me, whatever you need to break or rebuild or burn away, do it. I'm yours. The sky continued to lighten. Gold began to seep into the violet, then orange, then a brilliant pink that made the ocean shimmer. And then, just as the first sliver of sun broke above the horizon, he was there. But this time, Jesus didn't appear sad or grieving or angry. This time his face was radiant with joy, pure, uncontainable, overwhelming joy. He stood at the edge of the overlook with his arms spread wide, his face turned toward the rising sun, and he was laughing, actually laughing. The sound of it was like music, like water, like something so beautiful and unexpected that I started laughing too, even though I didn't know why. "Jonathan," he called out, his voice ringing across the overlook. "Come, stand with me. Watch what I'm about to show you." I scrambled to my feet and moved to his side. The sun was rising faster now, a massive sphere of gold lifting itself out of the ocean, painting everything in light so brilliant it almost hurt to look at. "For 3 nights I've shown you the darkness," Jesus said, his eyes still fixed on the sunrise. "I've shown you the compromise, the failure, the consequences of choosing comfort over truth. And you needed to see that. The church needs to see that. Because you can't fight an enemy you don't recognize, and you can't avoid a trap you don't know exists." He turned to look at me, and his smile was so full of love and pride that I felt my throat tighten. "But tonight, this morning, I'm going to show you the other side. I'm going to show you what happens to those who stand firm. I'm going to show you the glory that awaits the faithful remnant. I'm going to show you why it's worth it, why losing everything for my sake means gaining everything that truly matters." The sun cleared the horizon completely, and suddenly the entire ocean was ablaze with light. Gold and orange and pink reflected off every wave, every ripple, creating a pathway of light that stretched from the shore to the horizon. Jesus gestured toward it. "Look, really look. What do you see?" I looked, and my vision shifted the way it had the previous nights. But this time, instead of seeing down into the depths, I saw across the surface, and there, walking on the pathway of light, I saw people. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. They were moving toward the shore, toward the island, toward us, and their faces were radiant with the same joy I'd seen on Jesus' face. "Who are they?" I whispered. "The remnant," Jesus said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "These are the ones who will stand firm during the test. These are the ones who will refuse to compromise no matter the cost. These are the ones who will choose me over comfort, truth over acceptance, holiness over popularity." As they drew closer, I could see them more clearly. They weren't all the same. There were young and old, every ethnicity, every background. Some were dressed in business suits, others in work clothes, others in casual wear. Some looked wealthy, others looked poor. But they all had one thing in common. Their eyes were alive with a fire I'd never seen before, a passion and conviction and absolute certainty that transcended circumstances. "These are my warriors," Jesus said. "These are the ones I'm raising up for this hour. They don't look like what the world expects. They're not all polished and professional. They're not all educated and articulate. Some of them are broken, some of them are struggling, some of them have failed me in the past just like you have. But they've made a choice, a fundamental, irrevocable choice that no matter what comes, no matter what it costs, they will not deny me. The figures reached the shore and began to climb up toward the overlook. As they passed by me, I could hear them speaking, praying, worshiping. Their words were in different languages, different styles, but the substance was the same. Absolute devotion to Jesus, absolute commitment to truth, absolute refusal to compromise. What happens to them? I asked. After the test, after they stand firm, what happens? Jesus' smile grew even wider. Watch. The scene shifted. I was no longer on the island overlook, but somewhere else, somewhere that felt like it existed outside of normal time and space. I saw the same people, the remnant, but now they were gathered in groups, in homes, in small meetings. And the presence of God was so thick among them it was almost visible, like a cloud, like fire, like the glory that filled the temple in the Old Testament. When the larger church compromises and loses my presence, Jesus explained, these faithful ones will become the carriers of true revival, not the manufactured, emotional, temporary revival that's been marketed and sold, but real revival, the kind that transforms lives, that breaks addictions, that heals families, that turns cities upside down. I watched as people were healed in these gatherings, not through elaborate productions or famous ministers, but through simple prayers offered by ordinary believers who had learned to hear my voice and move in my power. I watched as prodigals came home, as marriages were restored, as the demonized were set free, as the lost were saved. This is what I've always wanted, Jesus said, his voice passionate. Not big buildings and professional productions and celebrity pastors, just my people, filled with my spirit, moving in my power, doing the works I did and greater works because they believe in me without compromise. The scene shifted again, and now I saw the future, months and years beyond February. I saw the remnant growing, not through marketing campaigns or slick presentations, but through authentic transformation. I saw people who had been part of the compromised churches becoming disillusioned with the emptiness and seeking something real, something that cost something, something that actually had the power to change them. The compromised churches will continue to decline, Jesus said, but these faithful ones will grow, not in the ways the world measures growth, not necessarily in numbers or budgets or buildings, but in depth, in power, in genuine spiritual authority. They will become the foundation of what I'm building next. I saw networks forming, not denominations or organizations, but organic connections between believers who recognize the same spirit in each other. I saw resources flowing not to maintain institutions, but to meet needs, to support missionaries, to care for the poor and the broken. I saw a church that looked more like the Book of Acts than anything I'd seen in modern America. This is what's possible, Jesus said, for those who are willing to pay the price, for those who are willing to be rejected by the religious establishment, to be called extremists and fundamentalists and troublemakers, for those who are willing to lose their reputation, their comfort, their security for my sake. The vision faded, and we were back on the overlook. The sun was fully risen now, the sky a brilliant blue, the ocean sparkling in the morning light. Behind us I heard footsteps, and I turned to see the cloud of witnesses from the previous night returning, but this time they weren't weeping. They were smiling, nodding, their faces full of approval and encouragement. They know, Jesus said, gesturing to the witnesses. They know what it costs to stand firm. They paid the price in their generations. Some of them were martyred. Some of them lost everything. Some of them were rejected by their families, their communities, their churches. But they stood firm. And now they're cheering you on, cheering on this generation, praying that you'll have the same courage they had. One of the figures stepped forward, an older man with kind eyes and weathered features. He looked at me and spoke, his voice clear despite his translucent form. "It's worth it," he said simply. "Whatever it costs, it's worth it. I lost my life for refusing to compromise, but I gained everything that matters. Don't be afraid of the test. Be afraid of failing it." Other figures stepped forward, each sharing a brief word of encouragement. Stand firm. Don't compromise. Trust him completely. The cost is temporary, but the reward is eternal. Your faithfulness matters more than you know. Jesus raised his hand, and the witnesses faded back into the background, still present, but silent now. "Jonathan, I need you to understand something crucial," he said, his tone becoming more serious. "What I'm showing you isn't just for you. It's for everyone who will watch these videos, everyone who will hear these words. Some of them are already part of the remnant. They just don't know it yet. They've been feeling isolated, feeling like they're the only ones who see what's happening, feeling like they're crazy for refusing to go along with the compromise they see all around them. He placed his hand on my shoulder. I need you to tell them they're not alone. I need you to tell them that I see them, that I'm proud of them, that their faithfulness matters. I need you to tell them that what feels like isolation now is actually preparation for what I'm about to do through them. I will, Lord, I said. I'll tell them everything you've shown me. And others, he continued, others are on the fence. They want to be faithful, but they're afraid. They're worried about what standing firm will cost them. They're calculating the price and wondering if it's too high. His grip on my shoulder tightened. Tell them this. The price of compromise is always higher than the price of faithfulness. Always. They might save their comfort in the short term, but they'll lose their souls in the long term. They might maintain their reputation with men, but they'll lose their standing with me. They might keep their security, but they'll forfeit their destiny. The sun was climbing higher now, and the temperature was rising. I could feel the warmth on my face, chasing away the chill of the early morning. What about the practical side? I asked. What do people actually do to prepare? How do they get ready for the test? Jesus smiled, and I could tell he'd been waiting for this question. It's simpler than they think, but harder than they want it to be. It comes down to this. They need to learn to hear my voice above every other voice, above the voice of culture, above the voice of their fears, above the voice of their desires for comfort and acceptance. They need to practice obedience in the small things now, so they'll be ready for obedience in the big things when the test comes. He began to walk along the edge of the overlook, and I walked with him. Here's what I want them to do, starting today. Every day between now and February 3rd, I want them to spend 30 minutes in my presence with no agenda except to listen, not to pray their lists, not to read their devotionals, not to listen to worship music, though all those things are good, but just to sit in silence and learn to recognize my voice. 30 minutes, I repeated. 30 minutes, he confirmed. And during that time, I want them to ask me one question. Lord, is there any area of my life where I'm compromising? Any place where I'm choosing comfort over obedience? Any truth I'm staying silent about because speaking would cost me? He stopped walking and turned to face me. And then I want them to listen, really listen. And when I show them something, and I will show them something, I want them to obey immediately. Not tomorrow, not when it's convenient, immediately. Because the test on February 3rd through 7th will require immediate obedience, and they need to build that muscle now. What else? I asked. I want them to find at least one other person who's serious about standing firm and commit to praying together, encouraging each other, holding each other accountable. Because when the test comes, isolation will be one of the enemy's greatest weapons. He'll try to make them feel like they're the only ones, like they're crazy, like everyone else is compromising, so they should too. But if they have even one other person standing with them, it will make all the difference. He looked out over the ocean, where the pathway of light had faded, but the water still sparkled with morning brilliance. And finally, I want them to make a decision now, before the test comes, about what they will and won't compromise on. I want them to draw their lines in the sand while they're still thinking clearly, while they're not under pressure, because when the moment comes, when the cost becomes real, it will be too late to decide. They need to know now what they stand for, what they'll die for if necessary. The cloud of witnesses began to fade, their forms becoming more and more transparent until they disappeared entirely. Jesus began to fade as well, but more slowly this time, as if he wanted to linger to make sure I understood everything he'd said. Jonathan, you have 10 days. 10 days to share what I've shown you. 10 days to sound the alarm. 10 days to call my people to prepare. Some will listen, many won't. But your job isn't to make them listen, it's just to deliver the message faithfully. His form was almost completely transparent now, barely visible against the bright morning sky. And remember, this isn't ultimately about February 3rd through 7th. Those 5 days are just the beginning, just the first test. What's coming after that will be even more challenging, even more costly. But those who stand firm in this first test will be prepared for what comes next. They'll be the foundation I build on. They'll be the remnant that carries true faith forward. Lord, one more question, I said quickly, sensing he was about to disappear completely. What if someone watching this has already compromised? What if they've already failed tests in the past? Is it too late for them? Jesus' smile was the last thing to fade, and his final words hung in the air even after he was gone. It's never too late to repent. It's never too late to turn around. It's never too late to choose faithfulness. Tell them that. Tell them I'm not looking for perfect people. I'm looking for willing people. Tell them that if they'll turn back to me now, if they'll repent of their compromise and commit to standing firm from this point forward, I'll not only forgive them, but I'll use them powerfully in what's coming. Some of the strongest warriors in the remnant will be people who failed before but refused to stay down. And then he was gone, and I was alone on the overlook with the sun warming my face and the ocean stretching endlessly before me. I stayed there for another hour, just sitting, processing, praying. The weight of the 4 encounters pressed down on me. The warnings, the visions, the consequences, the hope. It was almost too much to carry, too much to comprehend. But I knew I had to try. I knew I had to share it, even if people thought I was crazy, even if it cost me credibility, even if it made me a target, because the test is coming, and most of the church has no idea. I made my way back to the house around 9 a.m., packed my things, and caught the afternoon boat back to the mainland. As the island receded behind me, I looked back at the overlook one last time. In the bright daylight, it looked ordinary, just rocks and grass and ocean. But I knew what had happened there. I knew what I'd seen and heard, and I knew my life would never be the same. So here we are, 4 nights of encounters, 4 nights of revelation, and now it's up to you. February 3rd through 7th, 2026 is coming. That's 10 days from now. 10 days to prepare. 10 days to examine your foundation. 10 days to decide whether you're going to be part of the 90% who compromise or the remnant who stands firm. Let me be very clear about what I'm asking you to do. First, start the 30-minute daily practice today, not tomorrow, not when you have more time, today. Set aside 30 minutes, I don't care when, just make it happen, and sit in God's presence with no agenda except to listen. Ask him the question, Lord, is there any area of my life where I'm compromising? And then listen. Really listen. And when he shows you something, obey immediately. Second, find your person. Reach out to someone you know who's serious about their faith. Not perfect, but serious, and ask them to commit to praying with you, checking in with you, standing with you when the test comes. Exchange phone numbers. Set up regular times to connect. Build that relationship now before you need it desperately. Third, draw your lines. Sit down with a piece of paper and write out what you will and won't compromise on. What truths are non-negotiable? What stands are you willing to take even if they cost you everything? What will you refuse to deny even under pressure? Write it down. Sign it. Date it. Keep it somewhere you can see it. Because when the moment comes, you'll need to remember what you decided when you were thinking clearly. Fourth, repent of past compromises. If you're watching this and you know you've already failed tests, already chosen comfort over obedience, already stayed silent when you should have spoken, repent. Right now, don't wait. Tell God you're sorry, ask for forgiveness, and commit to standing firm from this point forward. He's not looking for perfect people. He's looking for willing people. And if you'll turn back to him now, he'll not only forgive you, but use you powerfully in what's coming. Fifth, share this message. I know that sounds self-serving, like I'm just trying to get views or subscribers, but I'm not. I'm trying to sound an alarm. I'm trying to wake people up before it's too late. So if this message has impacted you, if you believe it's from God, share it. Send it to your pastor, your small group, your family, your friends. Post it on social media. Email it to people. Get it in front of as many believers as possible because they need to hear this warning. Sixth, leave an honest comment. Tell me where you are. Tell me if you're ready to stand or if you're afraid you'll fall. Tell me what compromises you're struggling with. Tell me what questions you have. I can't respond to everyone, there are too many of you, but I read every comment and I pray over them, and more importantly, your honesty will encourage others who are struggling with the same things. Seventh, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because what I've shared over these 4 nights is just the beginning. Jesus told me there's more coming, more he wants to reveal, more warnings, and more hope for the remnant, and I'll be sharing it all as he gives it to me. So subscribe, hit the bell, make sure you don't miss what's coming next. Now I need to tell you something important. I don't know exactly what the test will be. Jesus showed me that it starts on February 3rd and runs through February 7th. He showed me that it will require believers to take a stand that costs them something. He showed me that it will reveal who's really built on the rock and who's built on sand. But he didn't give me all the specific details, and I think that's intentional. Because if I told you exactly what to expect, you could prepare for that specific scenario and miss the point. The point isn't to pass one particular test. The point is to become the kind of person who can pass any test, who can stand firm in any situation, who can hear God's voice and obey it no matter what it costs. That's what the next 10 days are for. Not to figure out the details of the test, but to prepare your heart for whatever comes. I also need to tell you this. After February 7th, I'll be sharing what actually happened. I'll be documenting how the test unfolded, how the church responded, who stood firm and who compromised. It won't be to shame anyone. God knows I'm in no position to judge, but it will be to help us all learn, to help us see more clearly, to help us prepare for the even bigger tests that are coming after this one. Because this is just the beginning. Jesus made that very clear. February 3rd through 7th is the first wave, the first test, the first separation of wheat and chaff. But there are more waves coming, bigger ones, harder ones, tests that will require even more courage, even more willingness to lose everything for His sake. But here's the hope. Those who stand firm in this first test will be prepared for what comes next. They'll have built the muscle of obedience. They'll have learned to hear His voice above the noise. They'll have discovered that He's faithful, that He provides, that He's worth whatever it costs. And they'll become the foundation of what God is building next. Not the old church, the one that's been compromised and corrupted and captured by culture, but a new church, or maybe more accurately, the ancient church, the one that looks like Acts, the one that turns the world upside down, the one that moves in power because it's not afraid to pay the price. That's what's possible for those who stand firm. That's what awaits the faithful remnant. That's why it's worth it. I'm going to close with this image because it's been haunting me since that final morning on the overlook. Picture that pathway of light stretching across the ocean from the horizon to the shore. Picture thousands of people walking on it, their faces radiant with joy and conviction and absolute certainty. Picture them moving towards something greater, something more real, something more powerful than anything they're leaving behind. That's the remnant. That's who you can be, but only if you choose it, only if you prepare, only if you decide now, before the test comes, that you're going to stand firm no matter what it costs. The sun is rising on a new day for the church. For some, it will be a day of exposure, of judgment, of consequences for compromise. But for others, for the faithful remnant, it will be a day of glory, of vindication, of stepping into the destiny they were created for. Which group will you be in? The choice is yours. But you have to make it now. You have 10 days. 10 days to prepare. 10 days to get your heart right. 10 days before the test begins. Don't waste them. I'll be praying for you. I'll be standing with you. And I'll see you on the other side of February 7th when we'll look back together and see what God has done, who stood firm, and what He's building next. Until then, stand firm, refuse to compromise, and remember that you're not alone. The remnant is rising, and you're part of it. God bless you, and may you have the courage to stand when standing costs you everything.